let's see. There were a few questions about buses. It seems like there's always questions about this. I don't know exactly why there's so many, but maybe it's something that I think people are confused or at least curious how much the big mixers are treating individual tracks versus busing groups of drums or instruments or guitars and vocals and things like that versus the mix bus. Do you have a
Yeah.
general philosophy on that? Have you changed over the years? I feel like I'm doing more busing now overall than I used to, with like, here's a vocal bus, here's a drum bus, not doing lots of processing on it, but generally
Hmm.
like getting my mix, running things through a few buses, and then making little tweaks. Maybe I'll do a little overall compression on the vocal bus, or a little bit of, something like a Spectre, just to get a little crunch in the mid range, or a little Oxford inflator, or one of those things, but generally not doing a ton to the individual buses. Well,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts these days on that?
I mean, I love buses. I think especially in the era of 100 plus track counts, I think as a mixer, right, when you're kind of going into a song in the morning and you've got, okay, you have to mix a song in a day and you've got 150 tracks. Busing is just like, it's kind of the only way to stay sane with a lot of this stuff. Um, and it's also, as mixing is evolving, and you and John have talked about this, and we've talked about this before, where a lot of the times I'm doing a little bit more like production-y stuff in the mix as
You're
opposed to
getting
like,
under snare mics, and you're getting,
yeah, but a lot of times, you know, we're just getting a lot of stuff, and I think it makes a lot of sense where things are kind of more cooked coming to me, like the vocals, and there's several layers of vocals and there's stacks. Like it makes sense to just be like, okay, all the lead vocals into one bus, and then I can kind of have similar treatment. It makes automation easier. It also just makes, dealing with it down the line easier.
Mhm.
Inevitably as a mix engineer, you're going to be on the hook for stems. And so I put a lot of work into my template now where it's like, it's really hierarchical, um,
Hierarchical.
hierarchical. But it's, and it looks a little bit over the top. And like 10 years ago, I would have been like, this looks like a nightmare, but it makes it very, very quickly, or very, very quick to do stems at the end. But it's also kind of nice because I'll get 75% through the mix, and now with Pro Tools, those buses can be folders now, which is really nice. And just visually collapsing all of your buses and
Mm.
then just having like 12 tracks, whether it's your drums, your bass, your percussion, your vocals, and doing your final tweaks on that is so much more refreshing. And I find myself really actually listening to kind of the final touches of the mix, as opposed to just like that endless scrolling of like, what are you looking for? I've really
Yeah.
been enjoying that. And I feel like my mixes have gotten a lot more detailed towards the end about it, because it's so easy to be like, fuck, I'm going to do a fun filter thing, or a last minute delay throw or something like that. And it's a lot easier to kind of wrap your head around that if you're just looking at like very limited things. So busing for me is huge. And I do, even outside of that, I've always been a big drum bus guy. I mean, my drum setup is drum tracks. They go into one sub bus. That sub bus gets multed into three different buses. I've got uncompressed, I've got compressed, I've got distortion. Sometimes I'll add a second compression thing. Very rarely am I compressing individual drum elements. I like to
Hmm.
compress drums as treat them as an instrument. It always just sounds better to me. Works better with my gating structure. Then that all goes to a drum bus, and then fuck it. At some point I might send that out to another bus. Like, why not? Bob's your uncle. It's Pro Tools. You can do anything.
How much in your drum bus generally are you, like, what percent of each of the various buses of compression and distortion versus raw are you kind of relying on? Is it like you get your mix on the uncompressed bus and maybe there's a little bit of zhuzh on it, and then you kind of mix in and blend in compression, blend in distortion, or how do you do that?
Yeah, you kind of build the house, right? And I know that there's a lot of good knowledge and advice now to kind of mix with everything and I think people are averse to soloing and stuff like that, and I think there's some there, but for me, like my sensibilities, especially being a drummer, working on mostly kind of rock, indie rock music, like there's just like fundamentals where you have to get something to sound right. So it's always like, it's literally just starting with the kick drum usually. And it's just kind of working on phase. Like I'm checking all of the various kick mics with the various overheads. What am I dealing with? Was this well recorded? Was it not recorded? Like, okay, if it was well recorded, then cool. I can kind of start to open things up, be less reliant on gates. So all of that is happening uncompressed, right? And it's just kind of getting a balance of the kit that just sounds right. Because if it doesn't feel like a drum set to me, then all of my other decisions after that are just going to be, I don't know, getting second guessed. They're just going to be more challenging. And so, yeah, uncompressed. And then you can have fun, right? Once you've got the kit sounding like a drum set, and everything's in phase and in balance, then I'll start trying different compressors in parallel. And the blend will really depend on the aesthetic of the song. I mean, some rock music, you just need a lot of compression, and that's like stereo distressors. Sometimes, maybe like a Neve compressor or 1176 or something like that. And then distortion inevitably just to kind of keep something more contemporary. If you're using a real drum set in a modern context, you're going to have to compete with samples. And so you just need every trick in the book to kind of get that drum set to pop out of the speakers. So compression, distortion, and the buses just kind of help you try stuff very quickly. Because if you were kind of relying on, I'm only going to compress my mono overhead, or I'm only going to add distortion to this particular mic, it's a lot harder to audition stuff and kind of try things quickly to get to, something that sounds exciting so you can move on to the next element.
Thanks for watching. Just a reminder, all of this content is free. There's no secret knowledge here. There's no Patreon. We don't read ads. We don't have sponsors. We're just trying to build a knowledge base. All that we ask in return is that you share it with somebody. Thanks so much.